like Ann said, I was working here for 24 years when that's almost a fourth of the library's whole history. So I lived a lot of the story that I'm going to be telling you about today. I was also privileged to be able to research and write most of the library history book, although it was very much a joint project with editors and Trish Ridgway, the director at the time, and other people in the staff contributed sections. Also, we had court-ordered community service workers who helped do a lot of the research for it. So, yay, underage drinkers who got caught. When we talk about the library system, we have to go back to the very beginning, which, here we are. All right, something else got knocked off, I guess. Okay. Well, we'll do it this way. No, we won't. There we are, okay. Now let's see if this works. Yeah, okay. All right, we have to start the very beginning in our library system, and that starts with Judge John Handley. He was born in Ireland in 1835, came to the United States as a young man. He worked as a carpenter for a while, studied law by himself. You know, you could read law and then pass an exam. He was a lawyer in Pennsylvania and became a judge in one county and then was elected judge in another county, ending up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Not only was he a good judge and lawyer, he was a good businessman too. He had a lot of real estate holdings. He even started some banks in Scranton and also in Winchester. Now, how did somebody from Scranton get to Winchester and fall in love with our area? He first visited friends in Frederick County about 1869 and became very well acquainted with a lot of the local business people. And he fell in love with the people of Winchester and Virginia too. After a while, remember this was right after the Civil War, and Winchester had really suffered a lot of damage economically as well as socially from the war. So he started the Equity Investment Company to have stockholders pool their money and start businesses in the Winchester area. They had a list of about 10 different businesses that they wanted to start with this money. The first business was the Winchester Hotel, pictured here. It actually got built on Cork Street, but unfortunately when it was built, the economic situation in the U.S. was on a downturn, and it never really opened very much, and it became a failure. And people lost their investment money in the equity company. People think that's probably one reason that Handley left a lot of money to Winchester, because he felt guilty that he had been responsible for that. But back in Scranton, he was very successful. This is a photograph of his apartment in the upper part of this building, and in the ground level was a bank that he had founded. And then this is a picture of, to us, the most famous property that he had in Scranton, the Wyoming House. That was his fine hotel that he built on Wyoming Street. And as you can see, it's a magnificent building. So he took the time and the money to have a cobblestone in front of the street to accent his building. Before long, Scranton said, well, we're going to asphalt pave that street, and we want you to pay for the asphalt in front of your hotel too. He refused to do that because he'd already spent the money on the cobblestone. The city went ahead and paved the whole street except right in front of his hotel. And then to add injury to insult, they allowed a farmer's market to be right across the street where they had animals and hay and all sorts of messy things, which did not go well with his fancy building. He vowed revenge, and he got it after his death. So in 1890, Judge Handley lost his only brother, and he decided it was time to make his will. He didn't have any living relatives in the United States. He had been married but divorced and no children. So when he made his will, he left a chunk of money to Winchester for a library to be called the Handley Library, and that's what he says in his will. And then he had some other bequests to finish the education for students that he was paying for their education in Scranton. And then the bulk of his estate came to Winchester for the education of the poor children of Winchester. He died in 1895, and that's when the contents of his will became known. His body was brought to Winchester per his request to be buried in Mount Hebron Cemetery. By the time his body arrived in town, people had found out about this bequest, so hundreds of people lined the streets from the train station over to the cemetery. And the newspaper said it was the largest funeral procession Winchester had ever seen. And those of you who have been around for a while know that every year school children still march to his grave to lay flowers and hear speeches about how wonderful he is. So if you want people to remember you after your passing, leave a couple $1 million to Winchester and they'll do it for you too. Now, if he died in 1895 and the library opened in 1913, what was the delay about? Well, for one thing, it was a lot of lawsuits. For one thing, the city found out that they could not manage the bequest, the money, legally. So they had to establish the Handley trustees. And that required approval from the General Assembly. So that took some time. And there were some other tax considerations. That was a lawsuit. And then his first cousins in Ireland said, oh no, we should have had that bequest. So they tried to break the will. So there's another lawsuit. And then I think Scranton sued Winchester, and then Winchester even sued the Handley trustees to try to get the money back so that they could control it. Well, it was a good thing that the first chair of Handley Library, of the trustees, Handley trustees, was Holmes Conrad. He was a very accomplished lawyer in Winchester, and he had even argued cases before the United States Supreme Court. And I'm sure under his leadership, they took care of all these lawsuits. But even the last one wasn't finished till about 1901. About 1902, money in the interest had accumulated enough that they could go ahead and start the library building process. They chose J. Stuart Barney as the architect. He and his partner, Henry Chapman, in New York City, designed the library. This is a picture of the watercolor that they submitted with their proposal, and they said, this is what we envision Handley Library, the Handley Library should look like. And that was the winning bid. If you took this picture outside of Handley and looked at it, you'd see it looks pretty much like their initial vision, except the dome is taller, so you can see it from the street better. It's set back from the road about 18 feet, and also we didn't inherit all those statues, which I'm sure Adrian is glad of because you'd have a big pigeon problem with all those statues. Construction, they started digging the foundation about 1906. And remember, this is before you had steam engines and diggers and mechanical cranes to lift all the beams and so on. So we have pictures of them hauling the rock out of the foundation in wheelbarrows up a big ramp. Here's another picture of the library more under when it was closer to being finished. You see the block and tackles and all those devices to lift the metal beams. When the library was built, they say that we were the first to have metal framework rather than wooden beams. So it made a fireproof building. Also, we're said to be the first ones to have electric lights rather than gas lights. And the library's never been lit by gas, it's always been electric lights. Finally, in 1910, the building was finished and turned over to the trustees. That's still 3 years before the library opened. This time the delay was money. Handley's will said, hang on to the properties and just give the interest from the property's rental to the people that I want to give the money to. So Handley's trustees had used all the interest up to that date to build the building, but then they ran out of money to actually get furniture, books, and staff. So it's another 3 years before the library could open. The architects, the outside of the building was built pretty much the way the architects had pictured. Not so for the interior. This is what the architect thought that the auditorium should look like. Big columns, a lot of carving, and that was gilded carving too that they imagined. This is what we got, white. Then in the rotunda, more carving and gilt and colored walls, and a nice octagonal circulation desk in the bottom, a beautiful light fixture. We got white. But we did get that light fixture, and we got the octagonal desk. If you go in Handley Library today, you know that little bench that the statue's sitting on? That's a part of the original octagonal desk from the first day Handley opened. And if you look at it, it still has the Library Bureau logo, a little tag on the desk. Finally, in January of 1913, the trustees had enough money to hire the first librarian, C. Vernon Eddy, a Winchester resident and a printer. He had his own printing company. He right away started ordering furniture, shelving, and books. He made a list of all the books that he thought should be ordered for the opening day collection. The trustees were micromanagers, and they wanted to approve his list. So they took the list and crossed off some titles and added more titles that they thought would be more appropriate for this great institution of learning. The first day was August 21st of 1913 with an opening ceremony. It was in the evening, 8 o'clock in the evening in August. They're having a ceremony in the auditorium. And I think that the reason they had it in the evening like that was to show off all those electric lights. Now remember what time period it is. I grew up in the country, and we didn't get electricity until 1938. And here in 1913, they have hundreds of electric lights in Handley Library. And that information made the newspapers when they were describing brilliantly illuminated by all these lights. And the opening day also was covered by the Baltimore paper, the Philadelphia paper, and probably other papers up and down the seaboard, because this gift was really publicized. Imagine $2 million in dollars of that time for a little city of 5,000 people. The actual opening day of the library was the next day, and hundreds of people were lined up outside the building waiting to get in to get their first library card at the Handley Library. This is Miss Kate McVicker. She had been first in line, but some teenage boys elbowed their way in front of her, and they got cards number 1, 2, and 3, and she only got card number 4. This is her original library card. It's still in archives. Lorna can find it for you if you want to see it. She got mad and complained to Mr. Eddy and that she had been elbowed aside, and he tried to smooth it over by saying, "Well, Miss McVicker, you were the first lady to have your library card." I don't know if that worked or not. This is a picture, an actual photograph of what the rotunda and the circulation desk looked like. This is probably from the 1940s, but it's a good picture of that desk. Now, if you visited in 1913, things would have been different. There were only 3 staff members. Mr. Eddy, three full-time staff members. Mr. Eddy made $1,200 a year. Miss Gibson, who's pictured here, the older lady, was assistant. She made $400 a year. And then Mr. Hardy, the custodian, was full-time. I don't know what his salary was. Opening day collection had 2,345 books, and 200 of those were children's books. You could only check out 2 books at a time, and you could not bring your books back the same day that you checked them out. Remember, all this is in writing and paper, so it took a long time to do everything. That first day of the library being open, 120 people got their library cards before 12 o'clock. So there was a lot of frantic writing going on then. The library was open 6 days a week from 9 in the morning till 5 in the evening. Wait a minute, that's hours now almost. It was from 9 in the morning till 9 at night with those 3 library employees. So they had long hours. The library was open to all the citizens of Winchester who could use it. But if you were outside of Winchester, you paid $3 deposit to get a library card to be able to check out books. That wasn't an annual fee, that was a deposit. So if you decided you didn't want your library card anymore, you got your $3 back. This policy lasted for until 1979. So imagine 60 years of bookkeeping for that little $3 deposit. The library was very different atmosphere too. We have stories from a lot of people that said you had to be very quiet in the library. They would come around, Mr. Hardy would come around and shush you. Miss Gibson would stare you down when you first got into the door. And it was not like we are today. This sign on the desk says, "Quiet and order are requested." We have some stories of some children who came to the library, more like in the 1920s and 30s. Charles Burrell from Clark County, in fact, he helped start Clark County Library later. He said he loved coming to the library, walking on the glass floors, but Miss Gibson would terrify the wits out of you when you came in the door. And getting your library book was a terrifying prospect, but it was well worth it when you got your materials home. And then another young lady, I love this story, Don, let's see if you do this today. Another young lady said that she would run to the library because she was so excited to get her books, but she always stopped at the door to catch her breath because Mr. Hardy, the custodian, had threatened the children that if he ever caught children running in the library, he would cut off their ears. I don't think Donna does that anymore. Thank you. Now, Mr. Eddy was an equal opportunity as far as overdue fines. I found a letter where he wrote to a deceased woman's brother and said that his late sister had checked out books 2 days before her death and hadn't returned them, and he wanted those books back. This is a photograph of Harry F. Bird Sr. He checked out books in 1914. He was an orchardist at the time, but you probably know that later he became governor of Virginia. He was also a United States senator. But in 1914, he was just an overdue patron. So Mr. Eddy wrote him a letter and said he could either return the book, Principles of Fruit Growing, a good book for him to check out, or pay for it or replace it. So I'm sure it was replaced and everything was smoothed over because the Bird families, we all know, have been terrific supporters of the library for the rest of the 111 years. I read all the library trustee minutes for 100 years, all the library board minutes that were in existence for not quite that long, and there's recurring themes all the time. And I know John's found this out many times over. You need money to operate a library. For one thing, the trustees had bragged at that opening collection that this beautiful building and this library didn't cost the taxpayers anything because it all came from Judge Handley's money. And in the future, it was going to be operated by Judge Handley's money, so it would still not cost the taxpayers anything. Well, guess what? It was only 5 years before they started realizing that it's not easy to live on a fixed income. But it's still more than 10 years or maybe 15 years before Winchester started kicking in some money to help buy books. The population was going up, cost of books were going up, people wanted new materials, and they needed more money. Technology changes. Every time you think you're stocked up with the latest and greatest, in just a couple years you have to replace it and get more. Again, you need more money to operate. New sells. You can see in all the library minutes and newspaper articles, every time there was more money and new books, more people came in and more checkouts, and then when they start getting old and decrepit, then circulation fell off and door count fell off, and then they get more books. So that happened all the time. You need to advertise, and I'm glad to see all the public relations staff here. And I don't mean newspaper advertising or TV advertising specifically, but that's good too. But you have to get out and talk to the civic groups. You have to talk to the church groups and anywhere people will listen about what a wonderful service the library is, just like we heard right before my talk. Thank you very much. I agreed with everything you said. And planning is essential to move on. Mr. Eddy, in his first annual report, said, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we had a children's room, a special children's place where they could have their books and librarians or staff could read them enlightening stories and get them started to appreciate fine literature. Well, he talks about that a lot, but I couldn't find anywhere where he actually had plans to try to make that happen. So you do need plans specific to to move ahead. And then we all know this, people love the library. And we found this out over and over in doing the research, and people would come in, Handley when I was there, and I'm sure you get it, and all the other branches too, about how much they appreciate the library. Now, unfortunately, Winchester, Virginia was a segregated state at this time. The Winchester residents could use the library for free, but only if you were white. African Americans were not supposed to come into the library and use it unless they were picking up books for their white employers. To help meet the needs of the African American community, Handley Library did put a collection in the Douglas Colored School here in this stone building, which is still standing. 500 books, and Mr. Eddy trained one of the teachers how to manage the collection and to check out the books. I think that she would go to Handley once a week and maybe refresh some books, but they were still not allowed to come into the library and use the library. Then in 1927, the new Douglas School opened, and a whole room was dedicated for a library with books from Handley Library. And again, it was run by the teachers at the school. When you check the statistics at the Douglas School, they had more checkouts per capita than Handley Library did. It was very well used. And it wasn't just a school library, it was for the adults also. And like Handley, every time there were new books, more checkouts, and when the books got old, very few checkouts. And we'll come back to this subject a little bit later. Mr. Eddy was librarian for 46 years, so there's a lot of highlights to go through, so I've just picked out a couple from each decade. In the 1920s, first, Winchester started kicking in some money to help buy books and help run the library. Not a very big portion of the budget, but at least some money. In the 1920s, a lot of civic organizations got started in the auditorium of Handley Library, including the Apple Blossom Festival, organized, I think it's exactly 100 years ago this year. The trustees and Mr. Eddy started asking people to donate their family artifacts to the library and their family papers, because there was a lot of room in the library at that time for display cases and to preserve the artifacts, the history of Winchester. I love this picture. I don't know the story behind this buggy, but it was on the porch of the library. And then in the 20s, the library started getting a lot of artworks. This is an original oil painting by the library's architect. It's still on display outside of the boardroom on the 3rd floor. Mr. Barney wanted every building he designed to have one of his original paintings, and this was the library's. The 30s, of course, opened up with the Great Depression, and things were not going well at the library. Mr. Eddy had to take a large salary cut, which wasn't restored till the 1940s. But by the end of the 30s, the number of books had increased and they needed a place to put them, so they were able to install the top 2 glass floors for the bookshelves. And this is what the glass floor stacks looked like. It had windows all up and down that wall. You see some of those hundreds of electric lights there, those bare bulbs. So there's more place for books. Some of the 1940s milestones. A big one, new technology, microfilm. So the library got a microfilm reader, and one of these little reels could have all the information from newspapers that a couple big bound newspaper volumes would contain. So that was a great milestone. Saved space, much easier to use, and thriftier. And then Mr. Eddy was very interested in history. So Jed Hotchkiss, who was Stonewall Jackson's map maker, his maps from the Civil War were still owned by his family in Stanton, and Mr. Eddy was instrumental in getting the family to sell those to the Library of Congress, where everybody could use those maps, rather than a private collector where they wouldn't be able to be seen. The family was so appreciative of his work that they gave an original map from their grandfather to the Handley Library, and it's still in archives. It's still on display too, isn't it, Lorna?
It is.
It is. Mm-hmm. Still under the black.
It is. It's in the back room.
So if you want to see something that was done, it's a work of art. He was a real map maker, work of art. Now the 50s milestones. First was integration. This is Mr. Henry Brooks. He later became Dr. Henry Brooks. He had served in World War II, fought in several large battles during the war. When he came back to Winchester, he was getting his master's degree from the University of Virginia. He couldn't use Handley Library because he was African American. He couldn't use the Washington, D.C. library unless he had documentation that he couldn't use his local library. He thought he would try one more time to get books from Handley. So he went into the library. He did check out a stack of books, and he was walking out the door with them when Mr. Eddy saw him and said, "Who are those for?" And he truthfully answered, "Well, they're for me, I'm doing research." Mr. Eddy took the books from him and said, "Don't come back." So Mr. Brooks was sitting outside on the steps when the chair of the Handley trustees walked by and said, "Why are you sitting on the steps instead in the rain rather than inside?" And Mr. Brooks said, "Mr. Eddy won't let me in." So Mr. Harper went in and talked to Mr. Eddy. See, Mr. Eddy would have worked for Mr. Harper, actually. And he came back out and said, "Do you have enough nerve to try to get this bad situation changed?" And Mr. Brooks said, I do. So Mr. Brooks got some of his friends and family to go with him to the city council to ask for Handley Library to be integrated. Some of the friends and family, when their white employers found out that what they were going to do, they got fired from their jobs. But at least 4 people went to the council. And we have accounts from the newspaper and what Dr. Brooks told us too, that the city council tried to come up with other things. Well, how about just on Saturday morning? How about just one Friday evening? But they all said, no, we want the same access as everybody else. So the council that night voted to integrate Handley Library. It still had to be approved by the Handley trustees, and they approved it the next month for integration. And the library was integrated officially in 1953. We have stories from some people that say that they didn't feel very welcome based on past experience. So Dr. Finley, who was a dentist in town, would take small groups of children to the library and teach them how to use the library and how to behave according to library rules with the quiet and order and so on. So that was a big milestone. The second milestone, in my opinion, was when Mr. Eddy retired in 1959. He had been in declining health. He was 82 years old when he retired. He'd been in declining health, and you can tell from the annual reports that the library's health was not too good either, because they didn't have much money, and the library was dirty, wasn't being kept in good repair. The Handley trustees had always been in charge of the library as far as managing it and being in charge of policies and things, and the money and the school system. So they went to the city council about the time Mr. Eddy retired and said, "This is too much for a volunteer board. We would like you to appoint citizens to have sort of a library board or council to oversee the library, and we'll just handle the money and give them the money when it comes time." So just as soon as Mr. Eddy retired, the city council formed the library board, which started in 1960. They had a couple of young go-getters that immediately came in and said, "Okay, in 2 weeks, report back about what repairs the library needs. In 2 weeks, come back with children's programs. In 2 weeks, how can we open up a children's room?" So they got to work, and that's what they did. Now, it took another year before they could find the second librarian, who was David Rowland, and he was here for 4 years. He had a lot of work cut out for him because the library had stacks of old books that needed to be discarded and a lot of other things that needed to be attended to. Two things really made the newspaper when he was librarian. One is, he's pictured with it, somebody had donated live artillery shells to the library, and he found them when he was cleaning out one of the storerooms. So the military people had to come in and defuse those shells. And then the second thing that made the paper was the stained glass started falling out of the dome, down all the way to the first floor. They didn't have money to fix that, so the library board had a temporary ceiling built to catch the glass if any more fell. And that was supposed to be a temporary fix, but it lasted 15 years until the library was renovated in 1979. So a whole generation of school children grew up not even knowing that there was stained glass at Handley Library. The library board had gotten donations for furniture, paint, and found a place to have a real children's room in 1961. Still didn't have a children's librarian, but a lot of volunteers from the community would come in and present story times to the children in this room. The next librarian, the third one, was Lee Hubbard. He had started a phonograph collection. He allowed magazine checkouts, but he's most well known for scrapping the Dewey Decimal System in favor of his own book organization system. Well, they didn't have 100,000 books to deal with, but they had plenty. And of course, a lot of people did not like that, and a lot of board members did not like that. So you see, he only lasted 4 years. And the library board minutes are kind of funny at that time. In the library board meeting, he announces his resignation, and it's almost as if they elbowed him aside and started planning how they're going to get Dewey back. The fourth librarian was here for 15 years, and a lot of things happened during his time. Richard Miller. Is June here today? Yes. June, did you work with Richard Miller? You did? Okay. Yeah, June worked with Richard Miller, and I don't think anybody else here worked with him, but June's worked for quite a few directors now. And she could tell you a lot of the stories here. He started in 1973, and some things had already been, there was plans to build onto the library, but he carried those out. And then he's had a lot of other highlights, especially in 1979. The Handley Library doubled in size when the children's room and archives, that whole wing, was added on. The library became a regional system when Frederick County signed on and then Clark County signed on. That meant that they contributed to the operations of the library. Archives room was established. Before that, it was just jumbled up wherever they could put old things. And the archives, you may not know this, but it's jointly run even now with the Historical Society. And then the Friends were established. Elizabeth Engel, who's pictured here, started the Friends over a tree, but trying to save a tree in the library's yard. But then it evolved into the official organization, which we all know and love today. Now, just because the library was regional didn't mean that there were new library buildings in the county. That didn't come for a long time afterward. But they did buy a book van, and they had carts that they would wheel off the back of the van and take them to fire halls and church social halls and places like that so that people could check out books, even if they didn't get to come to Winchester. I think there were about 17 different stops in Frederick County and Clark County, and people loved it because that gave them an opportunity to have books too. This is Marjorie Diggs, and she wanted a library in Clark County from the 1950s, and she started advocating for a library even that early, but she got voted down until about 1980. Charles Burwell, who had been terrified out of his wits to come to the library, he moved back into the county, and together the two of them kept at the supervisors until they started a library in this house on Main Street. It was totally volunteer operated and when it first started, but Handley Library gave the books and the shelving and sort of oversaw the operations. Here's a picture of Charles Burwell on the right and Miss Diggs. It looks like that was taken inside the library. And we'll come back to more on Clark County too. I'm talking more about Handley because there's 80 years more of history, but we're going to get to the other sites too. The next director was Mary Ann Roos. She was a very good grant writer and got a lot of things going through grants, like a real big bookmobile that replaced the van. And then the first public computer card catalog was unveiled in the early 1980s. They had been working on that during Mr. Miller's time, but it took time to digitize all that stuff. And then the public terminals were available in I don't remember the year, but in the 80s. Then when she started, the city was checking out job titles and salaries and found out that, hey, library salary should be raised. So Mary Ann was really good about getting that done. And the music CDs had just come into being and a collection for that. And then another thing that really impacted the library, up until this time, the city was in charge of all the money. Any bills from the library were paid by the city. Any salary negotiations, the city. And that slowed down a lot of work and a lot of progress. So she started preliminary work on letting the library be its own fiscal agent, which means managing their own money and being in charge of their own budget. She also got this plan got a consultant named Rolfe to come in and do a long-range plan for the library that actually was a guide for 20 years, and it was known as the Rolfe Plan, named after him. The main thing that he said, you should have twice as many books as you have, because you have this big population and you're serving as a regional library. So you should have twice as many books, but there's not enough room in the Handley Library. So the next thing you should have is a Frederick County Library, 34,000 square feet. And for Clark County citizens, you should have a library of 7,000 square feet. The library board got to work on that. Trish Ridgway came in just as the Rolfe Plan was coming out, and she had other things to do first, like the library did become its fiscal agent, and they had to write their own personnel manual. They had to get insurance for the staff, they had to get insurance for the building, and a lot of things went into that, but it's been very successful. Free public internet service started about 1993 or 1994 with 2 dial-up terminals. You could only use it for 30 minutes, and then the staff would tap you on the shoulder and you'd have to get off. And internet was so new that the staff spent a lot of time showing them what to do and how to use it. The Funds for Books campaign raised $2 million for books. Bowman Library was built, Handley Library was renovated, and Clark County moved to a new site in the government office building. So Tricia's first years especially were packed full of projects with the goal of those 2 books per person and more than half a square foot of library space per person in the regional. That was the goal. The Funds for Books campaign got started with all volunteers. This is a picture of the library board when they voted to officially ask Frederick County to build a new library. They officially asked Winchester City to renovate Handley, and they also authorized Clark County to go ahead and expand that house by adding a modular unit to the back of it. All that was in the middle 1990s. Frederick County was the first jurisdiction to say yes. This is a picture of Bowman Library when Greg Lukemeyer, the architect, first saw it. It didn't take long to choose this site because it had so much going for it. Groundbreaking took place in March of 2000. This is the lady in black is Mr. Bowman's daughter, Beverly Shoemaker, which is still very much a big library supporter, and her daughter, and then county officials. And construction got started just about right away after the groundbreaking. This is Bowman Library under construction. When I took that picture, I was standing just about right here, I think. This is the children's room. The back of the library taken from the lake view. By November of 2000, cornerstone ceremony right out here, and that block with the date on is a block from Handley Library. So continuation in the history. And that's Mr. Bowman at the cornerstone ceremony. He provided money that, there for a while it looked like we were going to have to shrink the library because of funds and get a regular asphalt roof instead of a standing seam roof. So he donated money that the library could be built to the full 35,000 square feet and have a standing seam roof. Now Winchester said, yes, we'll renovate the library just about at the same time as Frederick. We thought they would come one project after the other, but instead they were the same project. This is what Handley first floor adult area looked like during the renovation. Handley's renovation was trickier than building Bowman Library because we didn't want to close the library for 2 years while the renovations were done. Found a temporary location, but it wasn't big enough to have everything in it. So archives stayed in archives during construction. Administration stayed in the building, and technical services stayed in the building. So we got to see a lot of dust bows. Very interesting to do that. The first temporary location we built was the Apple Blossom Mall branch. 12,000 books, no public internet terminals, but this was a very well-used and well-loved branch when Handley was closed. Library staff moved the books and all the shelving and put up the shelving and shelved the books all by ourselves in one day. Yay, Donna, yay! And a few other people. I'll get to your pictures here. And then the next month, so we were really confident, we were young and confident we can move anything. And we did. The next month in May, and over one weekend, we moved all of Handley Library to this building next to the post office on the Old Town Mall. We moved 41 tons of books, 10 tons of shelving, and plus all the contents of all the storage closets, all the file cabinets, all the desks, except archives and administration, in one weekend. And we were open for business in 2 weeks. 2 weeks after that. It was quite a thing. We had volunteers. This is how I know people love the library. Love it.
It's okay.
200 people came to the library to help move. And when I say move, we were doing physical work. It wasn't just, oh, you do that. We were doing physical work, and so were the volunteers. This is my daughter in the middle, and she not only helped with all the projects, she let me ask all her friends and all her acquaintances to help too. So we had students from from Sharando, James Wood, and Handley. Millbrook hadn't started yet, to help with the move. And then the lady in the background came during our move weekend in the afternoons after she finished her chemo treatments in the morning. This is what some of us look like. And these folks are still here working. I was hoping Kim and Danette would be here too. Sure. Is Anna here?
Oh, sure.
Is Anna? Oh, she's not here today either. Okay. And so there we were. And I thought I'd embarrass myself a little bit too. That's me. Now we'll leave Bowman for a little while and come back to Handley. The renovations took almost 2 years from the time we moved out till we moved back. They took out all the glass floors, they took out all the metal and cleaned them, they took down all the light fixtures and cleaned them and put them back, rewired everything. It was quite a thing. They opened up new doors, they closed out some old doors. It was a lot of work. We moved back with volunteers again and library staff in March, opened up April 1st to the public, and immediately staff who weren't going to be working at Handley started working on getting Bowman moved in. Bowman was finished and turned over to the library early May of 2001, and we were already got our shelving and our office supplies and ready to move in. As soon as we could, we moved the shelving. All the brown shelving out in the adult area was donated by the University of Maryland, and we had it in storage at the cold storage for 2 years until we could use it. Again, we had volunteers. That's Kim Bean, me, 2 Handley High School students, and Jim Lockett. I don't know if any of you here remember, but he had helped us. He was a volunteer, helped us at Handley. He drove from his new home in Pennsylvania to Bowman every day so that he could help with the shelving and the books at Bowman. Here we are putting up some more shelving. Almost finished by the time I think he was a Rotarian. We had Rotary Club, we had Kiwanis Club, we had everybody. So after the shelving was done, it was time to put up the books. This is 20,000 books that were duplicates from Handley or donated books in that move time, ready for the library. And we had 30,000 new books, so we had to take out our boxes, stamp, and put on the shelves. But again, we had volunteers. One lady had broken her leg. We had to wait at the curb for her to get out of her wheelchair and help her into the library so that she could help put away books. We opened Bowman Library officially in July of 2001 and going to celebrate 25 years before too long. I'm looking forward to the big celebration, Mary.
I'm waiting for you to help.
Okay, I'll bring my slideshow. Next on the Roth plan was Clark County Library. We hadn't forgotten them, but we had to work with the county government in Berryville too. The county supervisors suggested that if the Clark County Advisory Council, they were in charge of the volunteers and running the library then, if they raised a bunch of money, that it would go faster to get a new building. So they started a campaign for $200,000 and made their goal. In the meantime, the county government and Berryville decided to build a joint office building. And they invited the library to be a wing of the office building, and that worked out beautifully. Here's the building going up, and the aerial view. And when it was finished, again, we were ready. We were so experienced packing. I bet 3 of us could pack that whole library in one afternoon. But again, we had volunteers who came, and they were magnificent. This is Trish Ridgway starting on the CD collection. Jeanette Ewing was a former librarian. Karen, Karen's husband helped us. And packing up the children's area. And then this is how the children's area looked, or the new library looked in 2009 when we opened. And the adult area first coming in the door when we opened. Now, the next item up was 100-year anniversary. We made the most of that. We milked that event. We started 5 years ahead of time. We had a centennial program every year for 5 years. We had this kind of party and that kind of party. My favorite party that we had really was the staff reunion. We had in June of 2013. 4 library directors were there. And I love it. Okay, that's Mary Ann Roos, came from, I think she was in Minnesota at the time. Trish Ridgway, Mr. Rowland came, and Mr. Miller came. I think he was living in Missouri at the time. Now, this was in June of 2013, and the next director was September of 2013. So he didn't get to come to this event, but right away. I think, the way I remember it, is this right? You had already accepted the job, but it was still top secret, and we weren't supposed to announce it.
I went to some event.
You went to our big gala,
Yeah,
where we're all dressed up?
Yeah.
That was in September. You were at that one.
Yeah.
But I wanted you to come to the staff reunion, but it couldn't be announced yet, so. All right, and when John came, he's already talked about technology. He hit the ground running, trying to bring us up to date on technology. Remember, the Great Recession had been really bad on the library budget, so a lot of changes needed to be made. The first thing he did was look around, and we had dinosaur computer monitors. You know, they were this big and that thick. So he was able to get flat screen monitors, not only for the public area, but for the staff area too. Then that other plans had to keep planning, and then RFID came into existence in 2019. And I wasn't here for that, but I know that it took a lot of work, preliminary work, to decide what's going to happen, and the timing and the money. Money is always a big thing. And then RFID allowed for the automatic sorting system, which I love to watch that. I could just sit and watch that about all day. It's amazing. And then not only things that benefit staff, but to benefit the community, like the hotspots. my home is in rural Rockingham County, and we still don't get good cell phone reception. So I can appreciate how wonderful this hotspot would be to take home and use it for your work. So hats off to John. And then the next 100-year library book, history, I'm sure will feature a big chapter on coping with COVID. And my hat's off to John and all the staff who were here at the time for keeping people safe, keeping the services going, and learning all the new technology you had to. I know I had never used Zoom before, and it was wonderful. I was a patron then, and I saw a lot of your children's programs online, and it was terrific. Now, we already know what public support, wonderful public support, not only for moving shelves, and we even had the mayor washing shelves one time for one of our moves. Everybody just pitches in. But also, as you've already heard today, you make a difference in people's lives too. And I've got a couple examples here. This is Russ Potts. He was a state senator, he was a sports writer, he was a teacher, and he also had his own sports production company. He credited Handley Library for getting him interested in sports, because when he was, he said about 7 years old, he was sick in bed at home, and his father would bring home sports magazines from the library, which he read, and that got him interested in sports. And then Gary Chrisman is a Winchester entrepreneur. He was a former mayor. He was the one washing library shelves during one of our moves. He said that when he was 6 years old, he came to the library and asked where his things were that he should read. And he got mixed up with what they said, so instead of going to the children's room, he went to the periodical room where the newspapers and magazines were. And he thought, well, this doesn't look like it, but I guess this is what I'm supposed to read. So he started reading the magazines and the newspapers, and that got him interested in current events, which later led to his career in local politics and in public service. And then this is Dorothy Robinson. I didn't know her personally, but she grew up in Winchester. Her mother would bring her and her sister to the library to read and check out books, and very interested in that. She became a magazine editor in New York City. When she came home to Winchester in retirement and made her will, she decided to leave money to Handley Library in honor of her mother, who brought her to the library and got her started in her literary career. So she left $4 million to the library. So you never know how what you do will be received by the people that you're helping. So keep up the good work. And thank you for having me today.
Yeah.